was campaigning with Allison yesterday, so I actually watched your interview with her.
With her?
Yeah, people were calling her about it. The interview from, I guess it was last week.
Yeah, it was.
A
It
lot of
feels like
people.
it was about a month ago.
Oh, really? I didn't know when it was, but people were still calling her about it. So she was showing me in the car.
That's great. No worries.
Okay, ready? All right, first off, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today. New Yorkers are sick and tired of the culture of corruption in Albany, and Brian Benjamin's indictment and resignation is just the latest episode in this series of scandals that's been rocking this capital. And while all this misdeeds occurred, my opponent, Letitia James, did nothing. The only thing she did was accept $45,000 in campaign contributions from Gerald Migdal, the man at the center of the scandal that has shamefully forced Brian Benjamin into resignation. You know, she didn't investigate this matter when the reports emerged in early 2021. She didn't call for investigations into this matter, nor at the time did she return a dime of the corruption cash that was sent around. So today, I am here to ask why. Why did she accept this money from Gerald Migdal? Why did she not call for any investigations? I believe that's because Gerald Migdal was a strong contributor to her. Now, Letitia James waited until 2021 until a reporter called her out for not returning these campaign contributions, the same ones that from the same donor that Brian Benjamin returned campaign contributions back to in early 2021. So I am here to say that based on the reporting, it looks like only a fraction of this $45,000 was returned. I'm calling on the Attorney General of the State of New York, Letitia James, to if she has not already, return all the funds that she received from Gerald Migdal, his family, and his organization, and to have a public accounting to the public to see exactly how much money she's received from him over the years. New Yorkers demand and deserve an attorney general who's going to root out corruption and not turn a blind eye out of political convenience. And New Yorkers are going to have a chance and a voice this fall when they're going to have the opportunity to vote for myself, Paul Rodriguez, and the rest of the Republican ticket.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon. And thank you to my great fellow nominee and ticket Michael Henry, who I believe will be a tremendous Attorney General for the people of the state of New York. I'm proud to join with him today, calling for an end to the cozy cabal in Albany that has allowed corruption to flourish in this state. We are at an inflection point in our state, and what the voters do in this election is going to determine will either put New York on a path to greatness and integrity, or will continue to make New York a national laughingstock. When you look at the corruption at the highest levels of the state government, New York ranks among the worst, actually the worst in America. People who have been entrusted with the most power have abused it the worst as well. And those are just the people who have been caught and arrested. For years, Andrew Cuomo's corruption was on display with federal investigation after federal investigation. Billions of dollars of taxpayer money wasted in grotesque pay-to-play schemes. For years, lawmaker after lawmaker was hauled off in handcuffs for illegal kickbacks and other corrupt schemes involving member item money, just like Brian Benjamin, Kathy Hochul's lieutenant governor. Tom DiNapoli has been in the state controller's office for 15 years. Corruption has flourished right under his nose. And it is one of the top duties of the controller to use their audit power to be a taxpayer, a watchdog for the taxpayers. But where has he been? Has he ever exposed a lawmaker abusing the public money? Has he ever made a referral to the Attorney General? At best, he's been asleep at the switch. And at worst, he has turned a blind eye because the vast majority of the cases are either his fellow Democrats from his former colleagues in the legislature. Albany has become the cesspool of corruption, where elected officials have complete disregard for the rule of law. because it is a cozy cabal of total one-party Democrat control where everyone looks the other way so as not to rock the boat. Mr. Napoli included, DiNapoli included. Meanwhile, the taxpayers of the state and every New Yorker in this state pays a corruption tax. People like to say Tom DiNapoli is a nice man. Everyone seems to agree. Well, that's fine if you're trying to sell ice cream to children. But Albany doesn't need nice right now. It needs a pit bull. It needs someone who is fearless and has the strength of conviction and will to go after corruption. It needs someone who isn't there to make friends, but is there out of 100% fierce loyalty to the taxpayers. Tom DiNapoli isn't a watchdog. He's barely a puppy, barely a kitten. And look where that has gotten us. One-party rule is never good for any government. It puts too much power in the hands of too few and creates a system that incentivizes them to protect that power at all costs. When I am controller, I will use every tool at my disposal and will fight for new tools to ensure that taxpayer dollars are protected once again. This isn't rocket science. We know that these crimes have continued to be committed over and over again. There's one area in the $220 billion budget that continues to be a source of corruption, including Brian Benjamin's arrest, and that's member items. There's more money in them now than ever. I will dedicate a special unit with real teeth to look at these line items and ensure that taxpayer money is protected. I'm going to hold responsible not just the lawmakers, but also the agencies responsible for making these grants. This abuse will stop on my watch. People are fed up with our political system. They are voting with their feet because they think the system is rigged. And they're right. Who can blame them? But this year's election is our only shot to make real change for the state of New York. Our state government needs massive overhaul. We need an attorney general like Michael and a controller who will be a true protector of the taxpayers' money and will put an end to the stain of corruption and scandal that has plagued the state. Thank you for your time and consideration. Y también para mi comunidad latina, muchas gracias en considerar mi candidatura y la de mi colega Michael Henry. Thank you.
Questions, guys?
Should Lee Zeldin return the campaign contributions he got from Glenwood Management and Dean Skelos over the years?
I think you might have to ask him. I really have no idea.
But you're calling on Tish James to return the donations she got from somebody, so should other candidates for office this year do the same?
Brian Benjamin was the sitting lieutenant governor.
Would you mind going to the mic?
Bri-
Sorry.
Sure. Brian Benjamin was the sitting lieutenant governor that was indicted last week, and Letitia James was quiet on that day. In early 2021, articles started to emerge about the relationship between Migdal and Brian Benjamin. Brian Benjamin, during the Comptroller's race, started to return that money. The Attorney General, who's tasked with being the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the state, did not return this money until November, after Migdal was indicted and after a reporter called her out. That's why I'm bringing this up. As far as Lee Zeldin, I'm not going to speak for Lee Zeldin at this time. He's engaged in a primary, but the reason, I'm trying to point out the reason why I'm bringing this to light regarding the Attorney General. She's currently the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the state. She didn't say anything on the day he was federally indicted, and on top of that, she came out with kind of a distraction with the gas pipelines, overseeing gas pipelines and all that. In my opinion, it was to distract from this story.
What procedures or screening, if any, are you taking to look at your own donations to see if they might come from questionable sources?
Sure. I mean, most of the people that there are people, to be quite frank, that have wanted to contribute to my campaign that are in business. I've asked around about them, and I've decided not to take donations. And I don't want to say, but
I'm sure you'd like to know.
But the reality of the situation is, I'm somebody that could use donations, and no person is going to do their best. I mean, no person is going to have nobody's going to be able to prevent all bad contributions. Like we know how the system works. Since she was public advocate, she had a working relationship with this man. There's pictures of when she was public advocate on his website. There's pictures, as she's Attorney General appearing at his events. I'm not saying right now, inferring that she engaged in any criminal matters, but I want to know why she's silent, and I think she owes it to the public, as someone who's never shy to hold a press conference or go after other people, name call them, and try to give the inference that they're guilty before they've even had their day in court. I think she owes it to the public to at least say, this is the money I have given back, this is the money I will give back, and I'm giving it back. I'm not saying she's guilty of a crime. I'm just saying she should hold everyone to the same she should hold herself to the same standard that she holds everyone else to.
Very broadly, why do you think these corruption cases keep coming up in Albany? What do you attribute that to?
Right. Well, one part of it I think is one-party control. I think if one party just has complete control of a system, that's gonna breed a level of people feeling they could do what they want. And then I think secondly, look, it's not even a Republican or Democrat issue overall. I think it's just a level of people being too entrenched in government. And I think when you have like someone like myself, who quite frankly, I've never been in government, I'd be more than happy to serve a term or two as Attorney General and move on and never serve an elected office again. I think that gives me a little bit more freedom because I know I could build a business and move on with my life, and I wouldn't have to be a part of any kind of entrenched system. But I just think it's a culture that people have seen. I think it's a culture people become a part of. And, there's a lot of people, I mean, look, our last governor right now, he resigned in shame and now he's running $18 million, using his $18 million left over to run ads against the current governor and current attorney general. I think people see that, and they see in many cases that they're able to either walk away or they'll get what people would see as a slap on the wrist, or their case eventually gets overturned because of bad prosecution. And I think that they just like the criminals in our street, they just don't feel the consequence. And look, I can't say why people would risk their political career and their reputation to do the things that they do, but maybe the power is intoxicating to them.
I would add also as well, obviously one of the, oh, sorry. Oh, Mike.
Not this mic, that mic.
I have a very loud voice, so I think one of the foundations, as you know, of our American system is checks and balances. When you have complete one-party control in perpetuity of a state or of any entity, it sort of breeds, it breeds corruption. There is no checks and balances there. That's why it's so important to have a very strong or perhaps a multi-party system. And I think it's also very important as you as the members of the press, who are supposed to be one of the ultimate balances and checks in power, that you really do your job and really investigate and explore all these things, not for the benefit of one particular party or the other, but for the benefit of all the taxpayers, all the residents of the state.
Well, one thing I do want to say, in fairness, in New York, though, there has been a trend where it's actually reporters that have got to the bottom of things more so than the people that are actually supposed to do this job. So it hasn't been that there hasn't been coverage. Brian Benjamin was basically exposed by the media, but I do think also the public in this state deserves better. And it's not a Republican or Democrat issue. The people in the state deserve better, and people need to be held accountable, whether it's by the press or elected officials that were sworn to fulfill a task in office and took an oath when they took office, and many of them have forgotten the people that they represent.
Just a question for both of you on the duties of both of the offices that you're running for. Michael first. There are limits to what the AG can independently investigate. If you were elected, what would you try to push for, or would you try to push for the duties to be expanded to be able to take on cases like this more easily without a referral from the Board of Elections, for example?
Yeah, no, I had this conversation with you on television interview in the past. I do think that we do limit the ability of the Attorney General, and I would ask the legislature to expand the authority. I think we see in a situation where you have attorney generals investigating governors, but they're going to the governor to get permission to open the investigation. It makes no sense. I think we have to trust when we elect someone that they're gonna, when you elect someone as attorney general, or to the, Paul, to his position that he's running for, that person, you can entrust them to do the job that they're supposed to do. And then if they don't, you vote them out, or if there needs to impeach someone, you impeach them. But I do think that you're right. I think you do handcuff the Attorney General in this state, and that is something I would talk to members of the legislature and try to get them to change. I don't know if they would, but I totally think that the AG needs to be independent in any state, in my opinion. And there needs to be an independence in that office to where they're not having to go to anyone to get permission, especially if they have to investigate that person. So I do think that the legislature needs to change that.
And Paul, it's kind of the same question to you. What other duties do you, because you talked about new tools that you would advocate for as the comptroller?
Well, definitely, the controller actually has certain broad powers that are frankly underutilized. Anywhere, any agency, any endeavor that's happening in government where there's some state money or some state financial interest involved, the controller does have the power to investigate, to look further, to demand information from those constituents that are affected. So it's not always even so much of an issue that there is no power, but that it requires a certain amount of courage and a certain amount of force of will to actually exercise those powers. Our current controller, Mr. DiNapoli, he seems perfectly willing to go out after petty bureaucrats that take $1,000 here, $5,000 there. And that's admirable, don't get me wrong, but there are bigger fish and there's a lot more deep-seated corruption that's happening on a grander scale that I believe the controller really needs to have a more active role in. Are there limitations? Of course, but there's no limitation in the controller using his or her bully pulpit to really get those issues out and bring attention to a lot of the waste and corruption that's happening in the state. So in terms of new tools, is more it's less to do with that, but in terms of really taking a more active role in budgeting, and like I said, have a more active use of that bully pulpit to really get that information out.
Are there any new tools that you have in mind that you would advocate for?
I think overall, one of the things we need to do in terms of audits, typically what an audit consists of, I mean, coming from a financial background, I have a completely different idea of what an audit tends to be. But here is mostly a performance review, which starts out typically, well, we audit this particular agency or this particular contract. First of all, let me tell you, we couldn't get all the information because people were unresponsive. But let me start by saying, well, you have to understand they're short-staffed, they're underfunded, and then we get to the problem. And then when you look at it, there's really very little accountability, because accountability actually requires consequences. But when you get to the recommendations, there's no consequences actually recommended. And in some instances, like with the nursing home audit of the Department of Health, you recommend giving them even more money. Now, with all due respect, when has giving a politician or a bureaucrat more money ever made them more honest or courageous? Never. So those are the things that I'm referring to. In terms of the audits, I would look to implement really bring people to do actual forensic audits, actual financial, to see where the money's flowing, where we can really go behind the veil. And in some of these large contracts, some of the waste and fraud that we see in things like Medicaid and other programs, that sure, they're being audited, or recently where there's been $1 billion in incorrect Medicaid billing. Well, that seems like a big thing. Okay, you discovered it. Now, what are you going to do about it? And can you go now and maybe go deeper and find out how it happened? So those are the kind of things, the kind of vision that I would like to bring to the office.
Thanks, everybody.